The year was 1878, and the wind that swept across the Missouri plains carried more than dust. It carried the weight of every dream Evelyn Carter dared not speak aloud. A widow at 27, she had buried a husband, a small teaching job, and every hope she once held of a settled life. The schoolhouse in Independence had shut down when the town's coffers ran dry, and she'd been left with little more than a battered trunk. 2 dresses and a silver locket that no longer opened. It was there, in the flickering lamplight of a boarding house parlor, that Evelyn first saw the advertisement printed in the Kansas City Gazette. Wanted, a woman of sound mind and steady faith, willing to share the burdens of frontier life. Matrimony and partnership offered to the right lady by Mr. Thomas Laramie, rancher, San Pedro Valley, New Mexico Territory. She read those words 3 times before folding the paper. It wasn't love she was after. Those were luxuries for younger hearts. She wanted safety, belonging, and a place to rest her soul. The West, folks said, was where a woman could start anew, where the sins of the past blew away in the red dust. With trembling hands, she wrote to Thomas Laramie, offering herself as a sober woman of education, willing to serve in all Christian duty. His reply came swift and practical. He was a widower, owned 300 head of cattle, and needed companionship as much as help. There was no poetry in his words, only promise. Within a fortnight, Evelyn packed her trunk and boarded the westbound train. The journey began with hope and ended in the heart of nowhere. By the time she reached the Las Cruces stage depot, the air was thick with heat and sagebrush, and the passengers were thin with weariness. She had never known such silence, the kind that hums through endless plains where even the sky seems to sag with age. The stagecoach driver, a whiskered man named Clem Porter, tipped his hat. "You're bound for San Pedro Valley, ma'am? That's a hard ride south, especially for a lady. I've endured harder roads." "Mr. Porter," she replied, though her voice betrayed the tremor of nerves she fought to hide. The other passengers, a trader, a miner, and a young soldier, barely looked at her. In the West, everyone minded their own business. The driver cracked his whip and the horses lunged forward into a wilderness that seemed to stretch clear to the edge of God's patience. For 2 days, they rolled through mesas and dry riverbeds, the land growing lonelier with each mile. Evelyn kept the locket in her palm, her late husband's initials worn smooth. He'd been a kind man, a preacher who died of fever before their first anniversary. She had promised herself never to weep again. But the desert had a way of scraping old wounds raw. Each sunset painted the sand in blood-red light, and each night she prayed beneath the stars, asking if she'd made a terrible mistake. On the 3rd morning, trouble came. It began with a low whistle, a sound like wind caught in a canyon. Then came the thunder of hooves. Before Clem could shout a warning, gunfire split the air. The horses reared. The coach rocked, and a bullet tore through the side panel, splintering wood inches from Evelyn's head. She ducked and screamed as the miner beside her fell, clutching his chest. "Apaches," someone yelled. The word froze her blood. The attack was over in moments. The coach overturned, the driver shot dead before he could reach for his rifle. The trader ran for the brush and didn't make it 3 steps. Evelyn stayed still, face pressed to the dirt, until a rough hand seized her arm and yanked her upright. She looked into the eyes of a man painted for war, dark, fierce, and unreadable. His hair was black as obsidian, tied back with a strip of leather. He barked something in a tongue she didn't know, then tore her bonnet away and inspected her face. His expression shifted, surprise perhaps, or disgust. "White woman," he said at last, his voice rough but clear. The band numbered 6 maybe more. They stripped the dead, looted the coach, and bound Evelyn's wrists with rawhide. She was thrown across a horse like baggage and carried into the desert. Hours turned to days. She walked when they told her, stumbled when they didn't, her lips cracked and throat raw. By the 3rd night, they reached a small encampment tucked deep in a canyon. Fires flickered against the rock walls. The air smelled of sweat, horse, and smoke. She was shoved into a corner near a fire and left alone. That night, she learned her fate from a scarred old interpreter, another captive, half drunk and half mad. "They'll sell you," he said, coughing into his hand. "Ransom you to your white man, whoever he is. If he don't pay, you won't see another dawn." She asked if they'd send word. He laughed. "Only if they believe you're worth the trouble." When morning came, Evelyn sat motionless, staring at the dying coals. She thought of Thomas Laramie, the man who had promised her a new life. Would he pay for a woman he'd never met? Or would he thank Providence that fate had spared him the burden? 2 days later, the answer came. One of the outlaws rode back from the trading post with news. Laramie had refused to pay, said he'd never met the woman, owed her nothing, and wouldn't be blackmailed. Evelyn felt something in her break, cleanly, like a branch in winter. She was no longer a bride. She was a fool with a letter and a dead man's locket. That night, as she sat beneath the canyon wall, tears slipping into the dust, one of the younger warriors approached her. He was different from the others, taller, quiet, his movements patient and measured. He spoke to the others sharply in their tongue, and they stepped back. He crouched beside her, set down a canteen, and in perfect English said, "Drink, you'll need your strength." She looked up, startled. "You speak English?" "I did once," he said, voice low. Before the soldiers came, she hesitated. "You're Apache?" He nodded. "To them, yes. To others, no. I was taken from the mission at 12. My name was Daniel before they burned my village. Now they call me Kohan." He looked toward the horizon where the sun bled into the ridges. "They plan to sell you." "I'll see to it they don't." "Why?" she whispered. His eyes softened. "Because I know what it is to be sold." He rose, and before she could thank him, he was gone, vanishing into the shadows like a ghost. That night, for the first time since the ambush, Evelyn slept. Not because she was safe, but because she finally believed someone might still see her as more than a price to be paid. The next morning, the camp stirred to argument. Shouting echoed through the canyon. Then the leader of the outlaws, furious and wild-eyed, stormed toward Evelyn with a knife, gesturing that she be silenced once and for all. Before he could strike, Kohan stepped between them. Words flew, sharp, cutting, dangerous. When it ended, Kohan tossed something into the dirt at the man's feet. A horse bridle, fine leather and silver buckled. His own. The man hesitated, then spat and waved him off. Kohan turned to Evelyn and said simply, "You belong to no one now, come." She rose, unsteady, and followed him out of the canyon, past the watchful eyes of the others into a valley drenched in morning light. They rode until the sky turned blue again, and the desert seemed endless. Evelyn didn't know where he was taking her, or what awaited her beyond those ridges, but for the first time since Missouri, she felt something stir beneath the dust and fear. It was not safety. It was not hope. It was the faint, unfamiliar pulse of freedom. They rode for 2 days beneath a sky so wide it seemed to swallow the world. Evelyn had never seen land so fierce or beautiful, the kind that could break a person and cradle them in the same breath. The man who led her was silent most of the time, speaking only when the trail demanded it. He called himself Kohan, though now and then she caught him murmuring in English under his breath, as though talking to someone who lived only in memory. When they stopped by a dry creek bed, he built a small fire and shared jerky and water with her. Evelyn's lips were cracked, her hair stiff with sand, but she felt something easing in her chest. A strange calm in the midst of nowhere. "You said your name was Daniel," she reminded him softly. "Before they took you," Kohan's eyes met hers across the fire. They were the color of storm clouds, unreadable and steady. "Daniel died a long time ago," he said. "What was left learned to survive." Evelyn studied him, the muscles in his jaw tight, his expression hard but not cruel. There was a gentleness beneath the armor, something she couldn't name. "You speak like a man who's lived 2 lives," she said. "I have," he answered. "And I belong to neither." They traveled south until the land began to rise in low, rolling hills. Toward sunset, Kohan led her into a narrow canyon hidden behind a wall of rock. Inside was a small valley split by a trickling stream. Cottonwoods grew along its banks, their leaves whispering in the wind. It was a secret world, untouched and quiet. "This is my place," he said, dismounting. "No one comes here. You'll be safe." He built her a small shelter of canvas and branches beside his own hut of mud and cedar. She was too tired to protest, too hollow to argue. As the first night fell, the sound of crickets filled the air, and she felt the strangeness of safety in a land that had shown her none. Days passed slowly. Kohan spoke little, working from dawn to dusk. He hunted jackrabbit, mended his gear, and once spent an afternoon carving something from wood with his knife. Evelyn watched him when she thought he wasn't looking, his movements measured, deliberate, as though each act held meaning. He brought her a basin of water one morning. You should wash, he said. The trail dust clings to you, she smiled faintly. You sound like a husband. That drew the smallest flicker of humor from his face. A husband gives orders. I only offer advice. As she knelt to wash, she caught him glance away out of respect. For all his wildness, he carried himself with a restraint most men of the East lacked. It confused her and intrigued her. That night she asked, Why did you save me? You gave up your horse for me. He didn't answer at first. He was staring into the fire, the glow lighting the planes of his face. Once, he said finally, I watched soldiers take everything from my people. They said they came to bring order. They burned our homes, took the women, killed the men who fought. I learned then, mercy is a debt that must be paid when you can. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. And now you've paid it. He looked up at her, eyes catching the firelight. Not yet. One evening, rain came, the first she had seen in weeks. It poured hard and sudden, drumming against the earth like the beat of 1,000 hooves. She stood beneath the edge of her shelter, face turned upward, laughing for the first time in months. Kohan watched from his hut, a faint smile playing on his lips. You'll catch cold, he warned. Then I'll know I'm alive, she said, spinning in the downpour. Her dress clung to her, hair plastered against her neck. When she met his eyes again, something unspoken passed between them. A warmth too fragile to name, but too strong to deny. When the rain stopped, the air smelled of wet sage and clay. Evelyn sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket as Kohan stirred a pot of coffee. You ever think of going back? She asked. He shook his head. Back to what? The white man sees me as Apache. The Apache see me as white. There's no place for a man caught between. She studied his face, the strength and sadness carved deep there. Maybe you just haven't found it yet, she said softly. Maybe, he replied. But his tone carried no hope. Weeks slipped by. Evelyn began to learn his ways, the plants he used for medicine, the way he tracked game by listening to the earth. He showed her how to ride bareback, how to find water by following birds. She, in turn, read aloud from the small Bible she'd carried from Missouri. He listened silently, head bowed as though the words were ghosts from a life too long buried. Each day the line between fear and trust faded a little more. Yet in quiet moments Evelyn would feel the weight of what waited beyond the canyon, the world that would never forgive her for surviving with an Apache. One evening, as the sky burned orange over the ridges, she asked him, Do you think God sees us here? Kohan looked toward the horizon. If he does, I hope he's blind to what the world says we are. She smiled faintly. And what are we? Two souls with nowhere else to go, he said. It should have sounded hopeless. But somehow it didn't. Their peace ended when the sound of distant hooves broke through the night. Kohan's head snapped up. Riders, he said, his voice flat. He led her into the shadow of the rocks, listening. The sound grew louder, men shouting in English, the clink of spurs and gun belts. Evelyn's heart pounded. Who is it? She whispered. Settlers, maybe soldiers, he said grimly. Looking for you. She should have felt relief. Instead, panic rose in her chest. They'll think you took me. They'll kill you. Kohan nodded. Most likely. Then run, she said. Go now. He didn't move. I won't leave you. The words hit her harder than she expected. For the first time since her husband's death, someone had chosen her without promise, without gain, without fear. Within minutes, the riders appeared at the canyon mouth, 6 men armed and dust-caked. The lead rider raised a lantern. There, he shouted. By God, it's her. Mrs. Carter. Kohan stepped forward, hands raised as the men leveled their rifles. She's safe, he said calmly. I mean no harm. The sheriff of Silver Mesa, a broad man with gray whiskers, glared down from his horse. We'll be the judge of that. Get away from her, Redskin. Evelyn rushed between them. Stop, he saved my life. Step aside, ma'am, the sheriff barked. You don't know what he's done. I know what he hasn't, she cried. He hasn't hurt me or any of you. If you shoot him, you're murdering the only decent man I've met since Missouri. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Kohan's eyes never left hers. It's all right, he said softly. Go with them. You'll be safe now. I'm safe here, she whispered. But he was already stepping back, his expression unreadable. The sheriff ordered his men forward. They seized Kohan roughly, binding his hands. Evelyn fought to stop them, but one of the riders held her back. As they dragged him toward the horses, he looked at her one last time. Don't let them make you forget, he said. And then he was gone, swallowed by dust and torchlight. That night, as the posse rode toward Silver Mesa, Evelyn sat in the wagon under a cold, endless sky. The wind bit at her face, but she felt nothing. Nothing except the echo of his voice and the ache of something she hadn't realized until it was too late. She had come west seeking safety. Instead, she had found a man who risked everything to give her something far rarer, freedom of the heart, and somewhere beyond the black ridges. She knew Kohan rode in silence, still caught between two names, two worlds, and one woman who might never stop thinking of him. The road back to Silver Mesa was long and bitter. The sun had risen twice since the posse found her, and each mile of dust felt like a mile further from the life she'd found in that hidden valley. Evelyn sat silent in the wagon bed, her wrists raw from the rope that had bound her, her thoughts a tangle of fear and fury. The sheriff's men rode ahead, leading Kohan in chains. He sat tall on his horse, hands tied before him, his face unreadable. Every now and then, one of the men spat a slur, calling him savage, outlaw, thief. Kohan never flinched. He didn't look at them. He didn't look at her either, though once when the trail dipped through a dry wash, his eyes met hers for the briefest second, gray and calm as rain on stone. When they reached the edge of town, the people came out to see. Silver Mesa was little more than a scattering of buildings, saloon, church, blacksmith, and a few homes baked hard under the desert sun. Yet the sight of an Apache prisoner with a white woman at his side brought the whole settlement to its feet. They found her alive. Someone shouted, "Thank the Lord," cried another. But when they saw Kohan, the cheer turned to murmurs. Mothers pulled their children close. Men reached for rifles leaning by doorways. The sheriff swung down from his saddle, dusting his hands. "Bring him to the jail," he ordered. "We'll hold a hearing tomorrow." Evelyn climbed from the wagon, her legs trembling. "Sheriff Gaines," she said, her voice low but steady. "You're making a mistake." "That man saved my life." The sheriff stopped short. "He's Apache, ma'am. They don't save women, they take 'em. You're lucky to be alive." "You don't understand," she pressed, stepping closer. "He risked his life to free me from outlaws. He protected me. If not for him, I'd be dead or worse." The sheriff's eyes hardened. "Ma'am, I've seen too many good people fooled by smooth-talking savages. You don't know what you're saying." "I know truth when I see it," she shot back. Her defiance drew whispers from the crowd. The blacksmith's wife, Mrs. Crowley, crossed herself. "Poor woman," she murmured. "Must have lost her wits out there." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Get some rest, Mrs. Carter. You've been through hell. We'll see to justice." And with that, Kohan was dragged away. That night, the saloon brimmed with talk. Men filled their glasses and argued over what ought to be done. Some said hang him at dawn. Others said send him to Fort Bliss for trial. A few called for blood right there and then. At the corner table, Thomas Laramie sat listening, his face pale beneath the lamplight. Word of Evelyn's rescue had hit him like a blow. He'd thought the matter settled, that the bandits would keep their hostage and his inconvenient arrangement would fade into rumor. But now she was back, alive, and the town expected him to claim her. "She'll tell everyone you refused her ransom," said one ranch hand, half drunk. "That don't look good for a man courting respect." Laramie clenched his jaw. "She's confused," he muttered. "The desert does that. I'll set her straight." He drained his glass and left the saloon, heading toward the small room where Evelyn had been given shelter. Evelyn sat by the window, staring out at the moonlit street. The night was quiet except for the creak of the gallows being repaired near the jailhouse. Her hands trembled as she laced her fingers together. She hadn't prayed since the day Kohan was taken, but now, she found herself whispering to God, not for herself, but for him. A knock came. "Come in," she said, expecting the sheriff. Instead, Thomas Laramie stepped inside, hat in hand. He was tall and well-kept, with a banker's mustache and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Evelyn," he said softly, "you're safe. That's what matters." Her heart tightened. "Safe? That man who saved me is locked in your jail." "They mean to hang him." "He's an Apache," Laramie said, his tone flat. "He took you. You can't expect folks to forgive that. He didn't take me. He rescued me. You know what I mean, Thomas? You left me for dead." His face hardened. "Watch your words. You've no proof of anything." "I have the truth," she said. "You refused to pay them. You let them think I wasn't worth the cost of a horse." Laramie took a step closer, voice lowering. You'd best keep quiet about that. I'm a respected man here. People won't take kindly to a woman slandering me over some red-skinned criminal. She slapped him. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, Laramie's hand twitched toward his belt, but he stopped himself. You'll regret that, he hissed. By morning, that savage will be swinging from the rope and the town will thank me for it. He stormed out, boots striking the floorboards like hammers. Evelyn sank to her knees. For the first time, she felt what Kohan must have known all his life, that justice in the West was not a matter of truth but of skin and fear. At dawn, the square filled. The gallows loomed tall, black against the rising sun. Kohan stood between two deputies, hands bound, shirt torn from the ride. He met the stares of the crowd without shame. Sheriff Gaines read the charge. Kidnapping and unlawful detainment of a white woman. The words hung in the dry air. Evelyn stood near the front, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, her eyes burning. When the sheriff asked if she wished to testify, she stepped forward. Yes, she said. Her voice carried across the square. She told them everything. How the stagecoach was attacked, how Kohan had bought her freedom, how he'd shared his food, given her shelter, never once raised a hand to her. She told them how he'd risked his life to protect her from the same men who had taken her. When she finished, silence fell. For a heartbeat, she thought maybe, just maybe, they'd understand. Then someone spat. She's gone soft for the savage. Another shouted, he bewitched her. Laramie stepped forward, hands raised for calm. You see? She's confused. He's tricked her. The poor woman's been through trauma. It's mercy she needs, not blame. The crowd murmured in agreement. Evelyn turned on him, her face white with fury. You coward, she said. You'd let an innocent man die to save your pride. Laramie's smile never faltered. Innocent men don't hide in canyons with another man's bride. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's cheeks burned. I was never your bride. By letter you were promised, Laramie said. You shamed me and now you'd shame this town defending a savage. The sheriff cleared his throat. Enough, the verdict stands. Execution at noon. Kohan looked at Evelyn then, long, steady, and calm. Don't cry, he said softly. They can't hang the truth. But she did cry, silent tears that cut through the dust on her cheeks. As noon neared, Evelyn made her choice. She went to the church, tore open the door, and strode down the aisle where Reverend Porter stood frozen mid-sermon. She climbed the pulpit steps, eyes blazing. Every one of you calls yourselves Christian, she said, but not one of you remembers mercy. That man you're about to hang saved me. You say he's savage? Then what are you to kill a man for kindness? A murmur rippled through the pews. The preacher's hands trembled. Mrs. Carter, he said softly, please, but she cut him off. If there's sin in this town, it's not in him, it's in you. Every man here who's turned fear into justice, every woman who's prayed for vengeance while calling it faith. Her voice rang through the rafters. If you hang him, may the Lord judge you as you've judged him. Then she turned and strode out before anyone could stop her. Outside, the bell began to toll for noon. When the sheriff arrived at the gallows, he found the crowd uneasy. Men shifted on their feet. Women wept. Evelyn stood beside the platform, chin high, eyes fierce. Laramie whispered something to the sheriff, who hesitated. He looked out over the crowd, saw the preacher shaking his head, and finally sighed. Cut him loose, he muttered. A roar of disbelief went up. Evelyn gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. Kohan's ropes were cut, but the sheriff added, he's spared but exiled. He crosses this town line again, he'll hang without question. Kohan nodded once. I have no wish to return, he turned to Evelyn. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, if you go, I go. The crowd erupted in protest, but she didn't care. She stepped down from the platform, walked to him, and took his hand. Together they walked through the stunned faces, past the gallows, and out toward the open desert. The sheriff tipped his hat. God help you, ma'am, he murmured. Evelyn didn't look back. The sun was high and merciless, the air shimmering with heat. But in her heart, for the first time in years, she felt something pure and certain, the courage to love where the world forbade it. The sun was high when Evelyn and Kohan left Silver Mesa behind them. The land shimmered in the heat, a sea of red dust and endless horizon. They rode in silence, two figures against the wide eternity of the West, one marked by the color of his skin, the other by the choice she'd made. Behind them, the town watched from porches and alleys, whispers rising like flies. Some called her mad, others a saint. A few, mostly women, watched her go with something like envy. For once, someone had broken the cage that duty built. By nightfall, they reached the ridge overlooking the San Pedro Valley. The moon hung low and gold, throwing long shadows over the plains. Kohan dismounted and tended the horses while Evelyn built a small fire. "They'll come after us," she said quietly. He nodded. "Maybe not tonight, but they will." Evelyn looked into the flames. "Then we keep riding." He studied her face in the firelight, the pale lines of exhaustion and determination. "You could stay," he said softly. "Go back before the desert claims you." "They might forgive you yet," she shook her head. "Forgive me for telling the truth? For loving what they fear?" "No, Kohan. The only forgiveness I need I've already found." He didn't answer. He only sat down beside her, silent as the stars. They rode for 3 days through scrub and canyon, following old trails only Kohan knew. He spoke little, but his every action showed care, finding her water, watching the sky for signs of storms, letting her rest before he did. Evelyn learned more in those days than in all her years back east. She learned how to read the tracks of coyotes, how to listen to wind and earth, how to drink from cactus when wells were dry. But most of all, she learned the quiet language of a man who'd lived his whole life between worlds. At dusk on the 4th day, they reached a high plateau where a single oak clung to life. Beneath its shade, Evelyn stopped and looked out over the valley below. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Kohan nodded. "This was my mother's land once. The soldiers drove us out when I was a boy. I came back years later and found the bones of our village under the sand." Evelyn touched his arm gently. "I'm sorry." He turned to her, his gaze soft but distant. "You can't be sorry for something that never belonged to you. What's done is dust." Yet when he spoke, she saw the pain flicker in his eyes, the kind that doesn't fade, only hides. They camped there that night. The wind carried the scent of sage and rain. As the fire burned low, Evelyn lay awake, listening to Kohan's steady breathing beside her. For a long time, she stared at the stars, wondering what it would cost her to live a life beyond forgiveness. By the week's end, they found a valley, a quiet hollow between 2 cliffs, with a stream cutting through and wildflowers blooming where the water ran. Kohan called it Nashdoi, place of renewal. "We can stay here," he said. "The land's hidden. The soldiers won't come this far." So they built a home, simple, strong, and honest. Evelyn gathered stones for the hearth. Kohan cut timber from mesquite. Together, they raised walls and roofed them with brush and mud. It was nothing like the whitewashed houses she'd known, but it felt more real, more hers. Days slipped into a rhythm, riding at dawn, tending the small garden they planted near the stream, gathering herbs and wild berries. Kohan hunted deer. Evelyn dried meat and brewed coffee over the fire. There were moments of laughter, too. Awkward, soft, rare, but growing. One morning, she caught him carving again, the same wooden piece he'd worked on weeks before. "What is it?" she asked. He held it out. It was a small bird, wings spread, carved with remarkable care. "A sparrow," he said. "It flies low, close to the ground, but never forgets the sky." She smiled, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Like us." He looked at her then, and something in his eyes shifted, wariness melting into tenderness. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You should never have come with me." "And yet," she said, voice trembling but sure, "I did." He hesitated, his hand hovering near her cheek. Then slowly he kissed her. It was not the desperate kiss of hunger or fear. It was gentle, reverent, like 2 souls finally finding home. The world around them vanished, leaving only the sound of wind and water and the steady beat of 2 hearts learning the same rhythm. Word travels faster than any rider. Within weeks, the whispers reached back to Silver Mesa, that the white woman lived with the Apache in a hidden canyon, that she had taken him for a husband. Some called it sin, others legend. When the preacher spoke of her in his Sunday sermon, half the town listened with scorn, the other half with silence. "She was lost," he said, "and has chosen her wilderness. Let her be a lesson to those who stray from the path." Laramie, sitting in the back pew, said nothing. His reputation had taken a beating since Evelyn's public defiance. His cattle deals had soured, and folks no longer greeted him with respect. Every man saw him now for what he was, a coward who'd let a woman fight his fight. And that, Thomas Laramie could not abide. 3 months later, drought hit the valley hard. Wells went dry, cattle died by the dozens, and Silver Mesa began to suffer. It was then that a small group of settlers rode south in search of water and stumbled across the stream running through Cohan's hidden hollow. They returned to town raving that the half-breed and his woman lived beside a flowing spring, enough to water 100 head. Within days, a meeting was called. Laramie was the first to speak. "That land's God's land," he said. "No squaw lover and savage should hoard it while good folks thirst." The sheriff warned caution, but the crowd had already made up its mind. By dawn, a dozen armed men rode out toward the valley. Evelyn saw the dust trail first. She was kneeling by the stream when Cohan looked up sharply, eyes narrowing. "Riders," he said. "Too many." She rose, heart pounding. "They found us." He loaded his rifle, the movement quick and practiced. "Stay behind me." When the riders appeared at the ridge, the air was thick with tension. Laramie rode at the front, eyes cold. "This is our land," he called. "You've no right here." Cohan stood tall, unflinching. "This land was Apache long before your kind built fences. We take only what we need." "Leave us be." "Not a chance," Laramie spat. "You stole her and you'll pay for it now." Evelyn stepped forward. "He stole nothing, Thomas. You're the thief, of mercy, of honor." The men stirred uneasily. Cohan raised his rifle but didn't aim. "We don't want blood," he said. "But we won't run again." For a moment silence hung heavy as lead. Then the sheriff, riding near the back, called out, "Laramie, enough, you start this fight, you'll bring death to all." Laramie turned, face twisted with rage. "Then let death come." He drew his gun, but before he could fire, the sheriff's rifle cracked. Laramie fell hard into the dust, his weapon tumbling from his hand. The rest of the men froze. The sheriff lowered his rifle slowly. "Go home," he said. "All of you. There's been enough dying in this valley." They obeyed. When the dust settled, Evelyn knelt beside Cohan, shaking. "It's over," she whispered. He nodded, though his eyes stayed on the horizon. "Not yet, but someday maybe." She took his hand. "You could leave this place. Start somewhere new." He looked down at her, voice quiet. "This is home, Evelyn. For the first time in my life." And as the sun dipped low over the red hills, she understood. Home wasn't where one was accepted. It was where one was finally seen. That night the valley was still. The stars burned low and clear. Evelyn lay beside Cohan, listening to his breath and the slow rush of the stream. Somewhere beyond those hills, the town that had condemned them whispered stories of the woman who defied the West. But here, in the quiet heart of the desert, two souls rested at peace, unforgiven by the world but redeemed by each other. The summer after the standoff brought rain like the land hadn't seen in years. It came hard and sudden, soaking the dust, filling the gullies, turning the San Pedro Valley green again. The stream near their cabin swelled into a river, carrying driftwood and wildflowers downstream. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching the storm roll across the plain. The scent of wet sage filled the air and thunder echoed against the cliffs. Behind her, Cohan mended a saddle strap, quiet and steady as always. "Storm's moving east," she said. He nodded without looking up. "Let it. The land needed cleansing." She turned to him, smiling faintly. "So did we." He glanced up then, eyes meeting hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain outside beat a steady rhythm, a song older than the towns or the fences or the grudges that carved this land in two. By autumn, the valley had changed. The crops they'd planted now grew thick and tall. The small cabin had become a home, and the two of them had settled into something rare in that rough country: peace. They still rode to the ridges some evenings, watching the sun burn gold over the mesas. Sometimes Evelyn would paint the sky with the few colors she'd saved from Missouri. Other times Cohan would tell her the old stories, tales of spirits in the wind, of warriors turned to stars. She loved his stories most at twilight, when the sky was half light, half shadow, and his voice seemed to belong to both. One evening, he told her of a legend from his people, the tale of two spirits, one born of fire, one of water. They were destined never to meet, yet the rain and sun crossed paths once each year, birthing the rainbow. Together they made beauty, he said softly, but they could not stay. Evelyn leaned against him, her hand finding his. Maybe they did stay, she whispered. Maybe the rainbow is their home, he smiled. Then we live in their valley. In town, the talk had long cooled. Laramie's death had been buried with the drought, and Silver Mesa went on with its slow rhythm of births, deaths, and debts. The sheriff, tired and gray, had spread the word that the canyon was off limits, that the couple there wanted no trouble and gave none in return. Some folks still whispered about the Apache's white pride. Others spoke of her with a kind of awe. Mothers told their daughters that love could be brave, even if the world called it foolish. And though few would ever see the hidden valley, everyone in Silver Mesa knew it was there, like a promise carved in the desert. 2 years passed. Seasons came and went, carving time across their faces like wind through stone. Evelyn had taken to tending a small garden, growing corn, beans, and herbs. Kohan hunted less, fished more, and taught her the names of every bird that came to their stream. There were days of laughter and nights of silence, both equally full. Once a group of travelers stumbled across their home, 2 lost ranch hands and a wounded boy. Evelyn fed them, mended their wounds, and sent them on their way. Before they left, one of the men asked, "Ain't you the woman they said was took by the Apache?" She looked him straight in the eye. "No," she said. "I'm the woman who stayed." They rode off without another word. But later that year, the sheriff received a letter, unsigned, telling him that the valley folk were kind and that peace lived there. The sheriff folded it carefully and tucked it in his Bible. One winter night, when the wind howled like wolves and snow dusted the mesa, Evelyn woke to find Kohan staring out the window. His eyes were distant, his shoulders heavy. "What is it?" she asked softly. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "My people are gone, Evelyn. What remains of them is scattered. Reservation, soldier, grave. Sometimes I wonder if staying here is enough. If hiding in this valley makes me a coward." She rose, went to him, and placed a hand on his chest. "You are the bravest man I've ever known." He looked at her, sorrow flickering behind his calm. "You left your world for me. You lost your people too." She smiled sadly. "Maybe, but out there I was half alive. Here I breathe. Isn't that enough?" He took her hand, pressing it to his heart. "For me, yes. But one day this valley will forget our names." "What then?" "Then," she said quietly, "the land will remember. When spring returned, it brought with it something new. Life." Evelyn knew before she told him. The morning sickened her. Her body ached in strange, wondrous ways. When she finally told Kohan, his face broke into a rare, open smile. "A child," he whispered. "2 worlds in one heart." She wept then, and so did he. The months that followed were both hard and holy. Kohan built a cradle from cedar and feathers. Evelyn sewed tiny clothes from scraps of linen she'd carried all the way from Missouri. The valley bloomed again, and the sound of water sang through their days. When the time came, the storm returned, the same kind that had baptized the land years before. Rain pounded the roof, wind howled through the canyon, and Evelyn cried out in pain and faith. By dawn, it was over. A baby girl lay in her arms, dark-eyed and strong. Kohan named her Tsana, the bridge. Word of the birth reached Silver Mesa weeks later through a passing trader. By then, the story had taken root in every saloon and church pew. The woman who had chosen love over law, who had given birth to a child of both nations. Some scoffed, others prayed, but most just shook their heads and said, "That's the West for you, wild, cruel, and full of miracles." Years passed like wind over stone. Evelyn grew older, her hair turning silver, her hands lined by work and joy. Kohan aged too, quietly, gracefully, his strength still steady but his eyes gentler now. Their daughter grew tall and free, learning both her mother's books and her father's legends. She spoke English and Apache alike, moving between the two as easily as the river flowed between its banks. Sometimes riders would come to the valley seeking water or shelter. Some stayed for a meal, others for a night. Each left changed, carrying the memory of something they couldn't quite name. Peace, maybe, or grace. One traveler, a young man from Kansas, once asked Evelyn, "Do you ever miss your old life?" She smiled. "Every now and then. But it's like missing a dream you've already woken from. You can remember it, but you can't go back." When the time finally came, years later, long after Tsana had left to build her own home, Evelyn felt the weight of her years in her bones. She and Kohan sat together by the river, their hands clasped, watching the water move slow and steady toward the horizon. If the world had been different, she said softly, do you think we'd have found each other? Kohan shook his head. The world was cruel enough to make you brave. That's how I found you, she laughed weakly. Then maybe the cruelty was worth it. He squeezed her hand. Maybe it was the only way. As the sun sank behind the red cliffs, painting the world in fire, Evelyn rested her head against his shoulder. The last thing she saw was the sky. A ribbon of gold and violet stretched over their valley. The valley that belonged to neither of their worlds, yet somehow held both. Years later, travelers passing through the San Pedro would speak of a small grave marked only by a carved sparrow, wings spread wide. Beside it stood another, unmarked but cared for, surrounded by wildflowers. They said the wind sang there differently, softer somehow. And if you listened close, you could hear two voices in its song, one in English, one in Apache, telling the same story. That love, when it's true, doesn't choose a side. It builds a home where the world said none could stand. And that home, they say, still breathes in the heart of the Valley of Two Worlds.